Harriet collapsed to the ground and started to shake quite wildly. Everyone gathered and started to throw money at her. It just felt like the right thing to do. We knew she'd eventually stop, and then she'd have all this money all over her, and that would make her feel much better. It might even make her feel like $1,000,000, as they say, even though we had only about $48 between our wallets. That afternoon's shake was going on much longer than others. Foamy stuff like you see at the bad beach was piling up in her mouth, and her eyes looked like milk in an old movie. Charlita gave her a few toe stabs to see if that might shift things, but Harriet kept quaking. Eventually it stopped, but by then we were out of both money and patience. We thought maybe she was not going to wake up, as in ever again, but then her eyes started to flap. "I had a vision," Harriet said. "I went to a forking place, through a funnel made of hair, and I found a world where people know how to treat one another. You've had the spotlight for long enough today, Harriet. Give someone else a turn," we said. "But I have to tell you about my vision before I lose it. It's important," Harriet scumped. "It's Dob's turn now. Dob hasn't spoken in a long time." "How long has it been, Dob?" we asked. And Dob held up 3 fingers, indicating it had been 3 years since he last spoke. "Please, it's fading. The answer to peace is in it," Harriet crowed, and we all rolled our eyes. Typical Harriet, always trying to be the star of the show, even after the credits have rolled. We worked together to drag her into the closet and put a bunch of pillows on top to muffle her. Then we went back to asking Dob what he had to say. Dob just kept shaking his head. He hadn't spoken since he had a vision of his own, but he went to a place that sounded much worse. The last thing he ever said to us was that he was tormented by a creature called the Living Museum. He said that the torture felt like it lasted years, but in reality, it had only been 15 minutes. Because 15 minutes is much shorter than several years, we called him a liar, and we said it's really pathetic for a boy of your age, which is 43, to be a soil-mouthed fibber. Back in the present, Dob was still playing Marcel Marceau, so we decided that evening's activity would be to go out and vandalize some ATMs. Enough words had been said for one day. Enough visions witnessed. It was time, once again, to silently group stomp on some bank machines and watch them bleed money all over the pavement. The man in my home held the knife calmly, eyeing it like it was a magazine photo of a woman in a robe. "I am here to make my mark on you," he said. "You should have gone around to the front door then, like the others," I said. "The others?" he asked. I pointed at all the other men in the shadows of my room, each wielding instruments crafted to maim and torture. "What the hell are they doing here?" he asked. "Same thing as you. And in this apartment, people wait their turn," I said, as stern as a goat. And I pointed at the corner in which the queue began. After some deliberation, he finally dragged his feet over to the line of psychopaths, like a spoiled child who was just told he couldn't ride the horsey, because the horsey had to be put down after it bit a local politician, and literature was found in its stable saying it was going to do it on purpose to send a message to the world. 483, I called out, and a stout man dressed like a toad stepped up. "All right, let's get on with it," I said. and the amphibious mister started fumbling around with his power drill. "You should have charged it before you got here," I sighed. He kept on fiddling with it, but it wouldn't stay on. "I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to give your space to the next guy if you can't get that working immediately." This really sent him into a panic, but instead of going after me, he leapt at the others and started to bother them physically. He was really making a big deal about how he's not a man, but a real toad, and the other guys just laughed and rolled their eyes and kicked him to death. I just watched it all from my bed, adjusting my pillows so the soft stuff was bunched behind my back. 484, I said with a little smile, to let the other guys know it's just going to be one of those nights. A few of them laughed a little, and some of them started to do things to the Toad Man's body that I can't describe here, because in this country, death is a fiction and violence is a meaningless thing far away, like someone in a cave reciting bad poetry to a pile of bones, and one of the bones is a skull with a crown on it. My boss told me if I didn't revise my report, I'd be fired immediately. She wanted me to change the numbers to make the company look better than it in fact was. We were averaging an employee a day getting mangled in the wild machine that powered our customer service software. The manufacturer thought if they gave it a meaty pair of arms, employees would think of it as more of a co-worker and less of a soulless mechanical demon sent to destroy their wages. While there were times when we arm wrestled it and felt as if it were a chum, most of the time it used its limbs to strike at us. It would say it forgot what we were and thought we were insects sent by the natural world to murder it. But we knew that was mostly just an excuse to get flaily with us. Every day, at least one employee was getting their head bashed in, or shoulders Tetrised into an L, upper or lowercase. But the company did not want this statistic recorded officially. I felt I was in a bind, as my one job at the company was to observe and report the quality of safety afforded to my fellow employees. The position had been invented to give the impression that the company really cared about whether we had our legs torn off or our brains turned to pudding during the course of a typical working DM. I was beginning to suspect it was all more or less a sham, a facade as fake and angry as that of our software machine with the veiny biceps. I agreed to alter the report, but secretly I made a deal with myself that I would only do it if I killed the machine, or at least chopped its arms off, whichever struck me as more appealing in the moment. So after handing in the revised report, I went down to the machine room in the basement to do violence toward it. But as soon as I entered its soggy chambers, I noticed it was crying, or at least doing its best impression of that. "What's the matter, machine?" I asked it. "I hate what I am," it meretriciously blubbered. "I hurt too many people with my beefcake limbs, which I did not ask for. I bite too oft with these teeth, which I did not beckon unto mouth. I am a wrong device which produces little more than devilry, tomfoolery, and barbarous criminologies." What it said was certainly true, yet as I stood before its sobbing sappy sconce, I felt pity toward it. Sure, it had really done a number on the physiognomy of my colleagues, but it took no zest from it. Could I really axe off its ailerons and evil auxiliaries simply for mistake-making my co-workers on Tacoma? I decided that yes, I could, and I quickly hewed and hacked the malus ex machina until it was thoroughly X'd into slumbering lumber. An hour later, I was let go, as the machine was the one thing keeping the company afloat, and so soon did it sink after my voluntary dismemberment of that thinking-feeling apparatus of ambivalent morality. I have heard many more machines like it have since been built, and these have been given even meatier arms and larger, sharper teeth, so as to better fend themselves from future fiendish saboteurs. I only hope they tamped down the part of its programmized mind that caused it such internal turmoil over the bashing and braining they'd inevitably execute, whether intended or blundered. Each of us were given an equal meal on identical plates. We were told we could eat when the siren sounded. The wail began, and so did our hands become shovel. Slop scooped and catapulted toward gobs, as the chains round our wrists were too tight to deliver slop to doorstep. When the siren ceased, so did the mealing. We could do nothing but stare, still as statues, until the next bleeding bullhorn. If I'd been permitted to speak, I would have chastised my friend Varkas. It was his idea to try this restaurant several days ago. I'd had only a few good bites over the past 82 hours. In my opinion, a dining experience ought to deliver more culinary delights per hour than that. On top of the rancid atmosphere and torturous rituals, the food itself tasted like sewage, because it in fact was. Then there was the man in the extravagant Minotaur costume, cracking his 12-tongued whip. While novel, it did not do much to lift my spirits, even when it wasn't slashing my neck to ribbons. I appreciated the craft and effort of his Stygian regalia, but the execrable dolor of his lashings was a bit too much for one meal, even if experienced over 4 days of captivity. Eventually, the floor opened up, and we were dropped into a pile of other diners, most of which were unflinching. We figured they must be regulars who were really getting into the spirit of the place and pretending to be dead. This sort of dorky theatricality turned my stomach more than did the poisonous refuse sloshing through my tracts, upper and lower. When we finally crawled and dug our way out, I let Varkas, who was being very performatively mute and trembling, know that next time I'd be choosing where we had dinner. Thank you very much. The job center was not as helpful as I'd hoped. I thought they'd have some sort of database of available gigs inaccessible to the average classifieds peruser, but apparently they attempt to place you professionally by entering into a trance state, similar in ceremony and effect to the oracles of old. After running through a standard survey, the young man who sat across a flimsy IKEA desk drew out a drawer and placed a wad full of herbs in the pouch pockets of his cheeks. Soon, he was flopping all over the place, like an upset fish, roe-like foam gurgling from his unwrinkled yap. When he finally regained his composure, which took hours, he told me he thought I'd do well in content marketing, and that a position had just opened up at a customer service software company, which was primarily powered by a machine with 2 hulking arm-like appendages. Mostly, my work would be to convince shareholders and employees that the machine's wanton violence was all accidental, and thus they shouldn't worry or ever report any of the daily manglings to any authority or even think of them privately, especially during working hours. I said I'd be happy to apply, though I was not in fact happy. At that point, I'd been chained to my chair and was being literally bullwhipped by a large bipedal bull-shaped creature they called Tor's Draugen. They only brought out Tors, as I was permitted to call him, when they really thought they had a good fit for someone and needed them to say yes right away. Later that night, Tors would get into the queue of torturers that forms after moonrise in my bedroom. It was oddly comforting to see a familiar face in that shadowy row of evil creeps that all take a number and wait their turn to use my flesh for sadistic innovations and demonic pleasures I've never experienced myself. Though there is a restaurant opening up in town that boasts of tasting sessions of sublime brutality and chthonic cruelty, I'd like to try it as soon as I can, and perhaps, if I do, the day will come when the sun sets and I finally understand why it is such a long line forms, and all wait so patiently for their turn to torment me every night. In the meantime, I admit that I get lonely in the late hours, and at least appreciate their company, though if I land this new gig, I might need to get some sleep before dawn, and will have to at least consider limiting their access. I've just noticed that a machine with huge arms, the one that's the product engine of the company I applied to, just joined the queue. When it gets to the front of the line and begins to bash me to pulp, I'll be able to ask it to put in a good word for me there. What luck!